What's up? How's it going, everybody? Today I'm going to be talking about The Mandalorian and Grogu, which has been a long-awaited movie. I have been looking forward to this for some time, with some trepidation as well. So, having now seen this movie, I definitely have some thoughts. I have some good thoughts, I have some negative thoughts, and so let's just get into that wherever I plan on getting into that, because I saw this in the theater, didn't have a chance to take any notes, obviously, because I'm in the theater, and so this is gonna just be scattered thoughts, some positive, some negative, so let's just start somewhere. I guess let's just start with the concept of the movie itself. After 7 years, it's nice to finally have Star Wars back on the big screen. It's something that I was excited for whenever The Force Awakens was coming out, because back then I was like, oh, I'll probably never see a Star Wars movie in theaters. That time has passed. Well, that time came again with The Force Awakens and that trilogy, as well as with Rogue One and with Solo, all in that little clump, that span of 4 to 5 years. And so we kind of got Star Wars back in theaters to a mixed response, and those 5 movies, in my opinion, have a very big range in quality. Some are super up here and some are super down here. You know what I mean? You could probably guess which are which. And so after 7 long years, we now have Star Wars back in theaters with The Mandalorian and Grogu. And I'm kind of torn. I guess on the one hand, let me just start out by saying I liked this movie. I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. That's going to sound somewhat counter to a lot of the points I'm going to be making in this video. It's going to sound like maybe I didn't enjoy it that much, but let me just start out by saying I did enjoy it. I thought it was a good movie, and that these points do not make that not the case. Now here's kind of the other side of this being the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. The Mandalorian Season 4 was cancelled, and the remaining script or ideas or what have you were kind of repurposed to help create this movie. Now, reports have said that that script or those ideas for Season 4 were a large part of what this movie ended up being. This used to be The Mandalorian Season 4, but in a compressed version. Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have said that's not the case, and that they kind of built this movie from the ground up with an original story or with original ideas or what have you. I think that the truth lies somewhere in the middle there. But whatever the case may be, something that worried me going into this movie was, is this going to be a story worth telling on the big screen in movie format? Or could this have been The Mandalorian Season 4? And personally, I think this story could have been The Mandalorian Season 4. There's not much in this movie that makes me think that it needed to be a movie. And I think the big thing that I'm trying to point out there is that there's nothing in this movie that makes it of a higher level of importance story-wise to warrant it being a movie over just being Season 4 of The Mandalorian. I understand that people just want Star Wars movies, but if it's already working in show format, this is how this story began, this is how it's progressed up until now, I think there needs to be some sort of leap to take it to the big screen, to warrant it going to the big screen, other than just we want Star Wars movies, because if that's the case, we can make a different Star Wars movie. Now, on top of that issue I have with the story, I think that Disney kind of knew that this wasn't to the level of the other Star Wars movies in some way or other, because this is by far the lowest budget that any Disney-era Star Wars movie has had, and unfortunately, I think that shows. I think that this movie doesn't look bad, don't get me wrong, but it looks more like the Mandalorian series than it looks like a big-budget Star Wars movie. Every other Disney-era Star Wars movie, and just Star Wars movie in general, taking into consideration the time that they were made, they all look amazing. And one thing I can say about Disney-era Star Wars movies is that there's no point in any of those movies where I look at the CGI or I look at the effects and I'm like, that could have been done better. They all look great visually. And in this movie, The Mandalorian and Grogu, it looks more like the show, where watching the show, it doesn't look bad for a show. It looks really good for a show. But there's a difference. When you think of Star Wars movies, you think of amazing CGI, groundbreaking effects, things like that. And in The Mandalorian and Grogu, there were times when I thought, that looks like the show, not like what I'd expect from a Star Wars movie. And that's not to say that none of the CGI looked movie quality, but even 25% of the CGI looking more like The Mandalorian than like a Star Wars movie was enough to make me think about it during the movie, and that's something that I don't want to be thinking about. That's something that pulls me out of the experience. Unfortunately, while I don't think that the story as a whole warranted being a movie, I feel like there's not even the character development enough to warrant it being a movie, because while I don't think that The Mandalorian and Grogu pushes the story of Star Wars far enough, I also don't think that it pushes the story of its own characters far enough. It feels strange to say, but I think Rada the Hutt might be the best character in this movie. Now, in terms of all the characters in this movie and their impact throughout all of Star Wars, I wouldn't say that's the case at all. But I think that within the confines of this story, Rada the Hutt might be the best character. Grogu has a bit more independence in this movie than we see him have in the Mandalorian series, but it's really not that much. We were already trending that direction throughout the seasons of The Mandalorian. I don't think that Grogu's going to be his own independent character, separate of The Mandalorian, at any point at this rate. And what I mean by that is, yes, The Mandalorian and Grogu are a pair. That's made abundantly clear through the title of this movie, or if you've seen The Mandalorian show. But I think that Grogu's character is dependent on The Mandalorian being there, and I just don't know if we're ever going to get to the point where Grogu is his own character, as opposed to just like a sidekick. But Grogu is Grogu. He's the same as he's always been, essentially, albeit with a slow burn sort of development for his character. But I honestly don't really care for some of the things that they did with The Mandalorian in this movie. Over the course of the show, we've kind of changed his character. His character has gone through different phases and changes that have kind of shaped who he is at different moments. But we kind of just undo all that in The Mandalorian and Grogu. We just give him back the Razor Crest, we give him back his rifle, we do a lot of things that just kind of undo everything that the show did. And so I don't know, it just kind of feels weird. It feels like we're not allowing that character to change very much, and that's kind of just not making sense to me. And I guess while I'm on the topic of characters, let's circle back around to Rada, who we started with. Rada the Hutt is a character that I was excited to see brought back into Star Wars. Being in live action, it made no difference to me whether it was live action or animated, but I'm just happy to have that character kind of come back around, because being Jabba the Hutt's son is kind of a significant thing in the Star Wars universe, and it kind of just felt that we just forgot that that character existed or didn't want to acknowledge his existence. And so I think tying him back in this way is a good way to tell audiences that, hey, we're not ignoring what we did before. We were just trying to figure out what we wanted to do with this character. Something that was worrying me going into this movie was that Jeremy Allen White, who was a known actor, was going to be voicing Rada the Hutt. And so that just made me think he was going to speak basic this entire movie. I'm glad that we got to see him speak a little bit of Huttese. He did speak basic for the vast majority of his lines, but I think that the voice was really well done, and I forgive it because the voice was good, and because his character was really good in this movie. And it didn't feel like he just spoke basic because Jeremy Allen White was voicing him. Him speaking basic actually made story sense for the direction that they took his character in, and so I appreciate them putting that time and effort into developing that a little bit, into something that makes sense within the confines of the Star Wars universe. Unfortunately, I'm starting to get this feeling in some Star Wars projects that we're bringing characters back just to bring them back, kind of the glup shitto argument that people always make. And for the longest time, I just wasn't hearing any of it, but I'm starting to understand it a little bit more now, because it feels like we brought Embo, a fan favorite character, back in this movie just to bring him back. His role in this film could have been filled by anybody. And I know people are going to point to Cad Bane in the Book of Boba Fett, but in that particular case, Cad Bane and Boba Fett have a history. There was some already established lore there that they could just build upon. With Embo, you're just bringing Embo back just to bring Embo back. Another character issue I have in this movie is that it feels like some characters are missing. All of our core Mandalorian characters, other than the Mandalorian and Grogu, are just not in this movie. they're not mentioned. And for various reasons, I understand a lot of the reasons why they wouldn't be in here. Carl Weathers has passed away, so there's not going to be any Grief Karga. Cara Dune's not going to be in this movie because Gina Carano and Disney are not getting along. But it does feel a little bit strange going from the show to this movie, because when the Mandalorian is kidnapped by Embo and Grogu doesn't know what to do, sure, he's got the little Anzellans there with him, but it would make more sense from a story perspective for him to go to some of those characters that are his friends that he's acquainted with, people that are fighters like IG-11, who's still, I believe, Marshal of Navarro. Grief Karga, at least in universe, I know Carl Weathers has passed, but Grief Karga is there on Navarro, and so it just kind of feels a bit jarring from a story perspective that we just ignore all that. And the last thing that I'll say about the characters that are in The Mandalorian and Grogu, it's not something specifically about the characters in The Mandalorian and Grogu, but it's more about the characters in Star Wars as a whole. I know a lot of people are very excited to see their favorite animated characters come into live action, and they're very excited to see where that will take these characters. But I think this is something that has been sort of eating at me for a while, and this movie is just kind of the last nail in the coffin for me. I am not excited anymore for animated characters to be brought into live action in Star Wars, because I feel that the characters that originate in Star Wars animated projects are better in those Star Wars animated projects. I would be hard-pressed to name 3 characters in all of Star Wars that started animated, came into live action, and were just as good. I don't know if that's just a me thing or if anyone else feels that way, but that's just kind of where I'm at with characters being brought into live action from animation. Now, there were some things about this movie that I really liked. I know I just kind of complained or complained adjacent for the last however long, but there were some things that I thought that this movie did really well. I thought that the sound design, of course, was amazing. It's Star Wars after all. I thought that the music was really good. Bringing back Ludwig for the movie was a great idea. I'm glad that they remained loyal to him after he did so well on The Mandalorian. I think that that just makes sense, and I think he definitely earned his right to compose for this movie. And I really enjoyed the designs of this movie, both in ships and in aliens, the new ones and the ones that were kind of brought back and resurfaced after a long time of not being seen. And I think the biggest example I can point to for this are that the aliens in the fight arena that fight Rada and the Mandalorian are the same aliens from the Dejarik game that Chewbacca and R2-D2/C3PO play in A New Hope, or just Star Wars if you prefer. So those aliens, those designs, those concepts have been around since Star Wars has been around, and so it's nice to see that finally come into a more real sense. We knew those aliens existed, or maybe existed, just because they existed in this game, but we never actually saw these aliens at any point in Star Wars. They were always just in hologram form or in, physical piece form. I am somewhat interested with this being a movie that kind of came about through the Mandalorian TV show. I'm curious to know what elements, if any, from this movie are going to transfer over into, let's say, future Star Wars movies or future Star Wars TV shows. I'm curious to see if elements of this movie are going to continue in any way, because like I said, there was nothing groundbreaking in terms of the story or the importance galaxy-wide or anything like that. So I'm just not sure if this is even going to continue in any major way, because I guess it doesn't really need to with what transpired in this movie. Nothing from here really needs to go into future projects, but I'm curious to know if any will. Although a lot of what I've said up until this point has sounded pretty negative, the reason why I had to preface this video with saying that I enjoyed this movie and I liked it was because of this. Personally, I think that in my own rankings of the Star Wars movies, which I don't really have a set ranking in my head that I can just flip through real quick, I just kind of have a vague Star Wars ranking. Occasionally things that are pretty close might flip-flop, but generally speaking, I have, upper echelon, lower echelon, just a vague outline of where I would rank the Star Wars movies. But I think I can definitively say that The Mandalorian and Grogu is my third to last in live-action Star Wars movies. It would be fourth to last if we're counting the Clone Wars movie, if we're doing all Star Wars movies like that. But just, the Clone Wars movie is like the black sheep. That one always kind of gets forgotten about whenever we're talking about Star Wars movies. So out of all Star Wars movies, fourth to last, live action, third to last. And that makes it sound like I don't like this movie, but I do like it. I enjoyed it. I just don't think it's as good as most other Star Wars movies. And I know that's going to sound sacrilegious to some. I know that's going to sound crazy. And I probably just lost a lot of people by saying that. But it's just true. A lot of the other Star Wars movies that get a lot of flack don't really deserve it. And unfortunately, that kind of leads us to the biggest indictment of all. Ever since Dave Filoni took over Kathleen Kennedy's spot at Lucasfilm, I have been very hesitant. A lot of people were really excited for Dave Filoni. I was less so. And this kind of doesn't help. I know that Dave Filoni is one of the most celebrated and one of the best Star Wars minds we have at Lucasfilm, at Disney. And so I know that he's kind of got this cult-like following, but I don't think he's a perfect Star Wars creator. I just don't. I know that he's great. He's made some things that I've really loved. I think that he is the best when it comes to Star Wars animation. Look at Clone Wars, look at Rebels, look at Maul Shadow Lord. You know, I'm not as high on the Bad Batch as some other people, but even that, look at Bad Batch, amongst other animated Star Wars projects. I just don't trust Dave Filoni's ability to lead when it comes to Star Wars live action. And this is something that I felt before this movie, and unfortunately this movie just makes it solidified. I was not the biggest fan of Ahsoka. I think that that show has its faults, but I do think that Dave Filoni's flaws as leader of Star Wars are evident when it comes to live action. And it eases my conscience to know that Jon Favreau's involved, because I trust Jon Favreau more when it comes to live action. Obviously, look at Iron Man and all the things he's been able to do in live action outside of the MCU as well, but I think that ultimately I am hesitant going forward. I would touch more on that right now, but this is meant to be focused on The Mandalorian and Grogu, not on Dave Filoni, not on the future of Star Wars or anything like that. So maybe I'll go ahead and make an additional video, a separate video talking about that more at some point. But for now, I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, that's really all I've got to say about The Mandalorian and Grogu. I know that most of the points I made in this video were negative, kind of bashing this movie a little bit, but that's kind of the way that it goes. A lot of things that I don't hate, I end up saying negative things about. If you've watched my other Star Wars videos or Marvel videos or anything like that, sometimes the things that I like but don't love end up getting more negativity in terms of the points I make in the video than things that I actually just don't like. And I don't really know why that is, but maybe it's just because I hold these things to a high standard. Star Wars is my favorite franchise, and so I'm holding it to this S-tier standard. And while I do think that The Mandalorian and Grogu is enjoyable, there's a difference between enjoyable and amazing. And Star Wars, I know, has the capability to be amazing. And so that's the standard that I'm holding it to. And so I guess that's just my explanation for why I might be seeming a little overly negative. But yeah, what did you think of The Mandalorian and Grogu? How does it compare to the show for you? How does it compare to other Star Wars movies for you? Let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't seen it, I recommend going to see it. It's still a fun time. It's still an enjoyable movie. Just don't expect it to be Rogue One. Don't expect it to be Revenge of the Sith. Don't expect it to be Empire Strikes Back. Expect it to be like the Mandalorian TV show, and you'll come out having a good time. If you stuck around at the end of this video, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it, especially after I've been talking bad about Star Wars, which I know a lot of people are very passionate about. Maybe you stuck around just so you can hear how ridiculous I sound, who knows. But if you stuck around at the end of this video, I appreciate it anyway. If you want to help me out here on YouTube, liking this video, commenting on this video, subscribing to the channel, all those things help me grow the YouTube channel. Check out some of my other videos. I've done some other Star Wars things. I did Maul Shadow Lord Season 1 not that long ago. I've done some other far more controversial Star Wars things. So if you want to check out any of that, I will have the playlist at the end of this video. But yeah, until next time. This is the way.